this gorgeous festive red Gerbera daisy is a little bit more advanced with the piping techniques, but you can practice it at any time. You're going to want a really flat cupcake for this one. So this one didn't have much of a dome, but if it did, I would have sliced it off flat. And then I flat iced it in red. I've used Pro Gel Red, Pro Gel Dark Brown, and Colour Splash Sunflower Yellow for these little bits in the middle. So to begin, I'm going to use the 101 tip. You can use a 102 as well, but I like to use this tiny little one. It's got a fat end and a thin end, and you always want this thin end at the top. But I'm going to start off by using the fat end because I want to put a lip around the cake. So don't have too much in your bag and make sure it's nice and tight, and just have it to start with the fat end pointing outwards. Now pick up your cake, and all the way around the edge you're just going to pipe a lip. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it's just something for the petals to sit up on so that we create that 3D effect. So just pipe round as far as you can, stop, turn the cake and go again until you've gone all the way around like that. And then you can just clean off your tip. And that's that one done with. And now I always start my Gerberas with the centre, and I've got a really tiny piping tip here. It's about the size of a 5p piece. That's the size I want the dark centre to be. So I'm just going to place it in the middle of the cake here. And you want to get it really central because I work around the centre. So when you're happy with where the centre is, just mark it off like that. And then I'm going to fill that bit in first. So take your dark brown, and I've got a number 2 round in here. Not too much buttercream, and it's very, very dark. So make sure you've got a nice tight bag. And then just fill in that little centre bit with tiny little dots. And you want to keep these dots quite low because when you put the petals on, it will add to the effect of the petals standing up a little bit more. So just keep making these tiny little dots until you've filled in that whole little circle. And then back to this 101 tip, and this time I'm going to use it properly, so the thin end is going to be pointing upwards to create the edge of the petals. So I have a nice tight bag. Now if you want to use another marker for this, you can. I just eyeball it, so you want to leave a gap about 1/2 centimetre away from the centre. So you're going to start each petal the same distance away from that centre point. And I'm going to keep the tip flat to the cake. And then you just go up and down. And it forms a teardrop shape. Now leave a gap. And then put the next one in. Leave a gap. Put the next one in. Leave a gap. And you can see the motion here. I've done it in slow motion for you. I'm just going up and down. Turn the cake. Get your center point and go up and down. I'm hardly moving. I'm not creating that round bit at the top. The tip is doing that when you come back down on yourself. So have your start point. Go up to that lip. And then just come back down, and that creates the petal shape. And obviously keep turning the cake so your piping hand stays the same. And you can see I'm leaving a gap between each one so they're not right next to each other. This is just our first layer. So with each one, look for your starting point, line it up with that center, and just go up and down that lip until you've gone all the way around. That's the first layer done, so now wipe off your tip. And then we'll put a second layer and we're going to go in between, so we're going to fill in all the gaps. Do exactly the same thing. Start at exactly the same place and make them exactly the same length, and go in between each petal on your first row. And that way you create really lovely texture. So remember, keep the angle of the tip flat to the cake, start in exactly the same place and end in exactly the same place. So my start point here, my end point there is exactly the same place, and that's what makes the teardrop shape. And there's the second row done. Now wipe off your tip, and if you need to, just tighten up your bag. And now for the third row, I'm going to come in between these gaps again, and I'm going to make it ever so slightly shorter. So you start at the same place and it's the same movement. You're just going to finish a little way in from that edge, so they're a bit shorter. So start at the same point and the motion is the same, just up and down. And you follow that line of the petals you've already done. And then they look like they're standing up a bit, so you get that dimension in the flower. And you're just coming in between each gap. And there's your 3 rows of petals done. So I'm just going to clean that off because there's a lot on there. Now to neaten off these edges, I'm going to use a PME 56R. It's just this tiny little crescent shape, it's barely a crescent. And I'm going to use this one to just neaten off. So not too much in your bag, and make sure it's nice and tight. And then I'm just going to come in where we started the petals, touch down and make a small stroke up. Follow the angle of the petals and make these vary in lengths. And I'm leaving a gap between each one. They're just tiny little petals, but it's this detail that brings the petals and the center together. So now when you've gone all the way around, you can fill in these gaps. So do another row and come in between each of that first row. You can make these ones just a little bit shorter, but again, vary in lengths. It looks better if they're not all exactly the same. Alright, so that's that one done. If you're a beginner and you're just starting out, you can carry on with this tip and just keep filling in until you get to the center. But I'm going to use this one. It's a number 2 round. So don't have much in your bag and tighten it up. You want your buttercream quite soft when you're working with these tiny little tips. Now I'm going to come in and pipe tiny little spikes up against the center. So I'm just coming a real small way above those little dark circles in the middle there. It does take some time, but I think this detail is absolutely worth it. I've had lots of messages about my gerberas, and I haven't seen anybody else do them like this. This is something I came up with when I bought myself a bunch and I was studying the middle of them. The detail is incredible, so I wanted to make that in buttercream. So I'm just turning the cake and adding little spikes to fill in the middle here. And then as you come up to those small petals that you made with the 56R tip, you can make these spikes just a tiny bit longer. Clean off your tip if you get any that sticks to it, because it will ruin everything that you've just done. So make sure you keep that nice and clean. You don't want them to be too tight together, as you're going to put some yellow ones in. But you do want that gap all filled up. There we go. Now you can leave it there and it looks gorgeous, or you can add some little yellow ones. So this is a number 1 round, and I've got some sunflower yellow in here. And then I'm just going to pop in a few random yellow stamen in between these little red ones. You don't want too many, just enough to make them pop. So you'll see as you go around that there'll be tiny little gaps, and you'll just pop one in. And they're just tiny little squeezes I'm doing here. You don't have to touch down on the cakes. The buttercream will stick to the red that's already on there. You'll get the odd one that doesn't, but just wipe that off on a piece of paper towel, like that one. So clean that off. Make sure your tip's really clean before you go back in. And then just finish off here. I find these ones really therapeutic to do. I love the flowers with lots of details. Couple more maybe. There. And there it is, my festive red Gerbera daisy.